It was a very ordinary day similar to hundreds of the same days before it. The students sat at their desks and listened attentively to the teacher who was telling something and making notes on the board. One of the guys hid his phone and was browsing a social network. There was a very beautiful girl dancing in the video. The girl was so attractive that the young man could not hold back his smile and even blushed. The teacher heard this short laugh behind her back, and you were already angry realizing that not everyone was listening to her. She turned around abruptly and turning to Bei began to yell at the guy, noting how brave he was, but for this she would be one of the first to receive it. She said that he had become completely impudent. The young man jumped up in surprise and began to apologize. One of his classmates approached the teacher and suggested that she give Bei a punishment of rewriting ancient poems 80 times. This was Bei's sworn enemy who found a convenient opportunity to harm him. Bei stood up and said that the teacher was raising him as he should be like a father repaying his son for his sins. He said this phrase with a completely serious face. His classmate was immediately angered and glanced sideways at Bei, who dared to be rude to him. He immediately jumped up from his seat and reached out to Bei, shouting that he was looking for a fight. Bei froze when he saw this. After all, such behavior towards him right in the middle of class was very sudden. Bei couldn't understand why his enemy couldn't stand it and had to go overboard and push him. He could never have imagined that his life would end this way. He wondered if he managed to survive, his classmate would dare to do it again. Bei woke up from the words of an old man who sadly said that the young master had died such an absurd but cruel death, and it was very difficult to survive. Bei opened his eyes and said that it was very noisy around. The old man got scared and jumped up, doused himself with water, which he took to the young master. Bei was the second son of the Zhang family. He was 20 years old. Cultivation was absent. He cleared his throat and asked the old man to stop making noise as it was making him very uncomfortable. The old man clasped his hands to his chest and began to thank the Lord for the fact that the young gentleman had come to his senses. The young man was surprised at what they had called him and asked where he was. Bei immediately grabbed his head and realized that he had ended up in the past and that he had ended up in the body of a rich kid. At the same time, he ended up in a family of cultivators, but his father decided that he was worthless and did not have high hopes for him. He always got it very badly for his mistakes. His father did not pity him at all, but nevertheless did not hope that his son would achieve anything worthwhile. The old man began to ask the young man if he had any pain and asked if he was still worried about his marriage, which greatly surprised Bei himself. His memories were still a little hazy, but he assumed that it seemed like his family had decided to marry him off, and it would probably start with the engagement being broken. The young man assured Elder Du that he was fine and there was no need to worry. Elder Du noticed that the young master was trying his best to avoid meeting with Madame Shangguan, and so the old servant began to worry. The master was afraid and asked again if he wanted to break off the engagement. Elder Du noticed that the young man had apparently lost his memory and opened the portrait of his fiancée in front of him. Bei, seeing this girl, immediately shouted for the elder to immediately remove this monster from him. He immediately remembered that he was so scared by her appearance that he tried to commit suicide, but it was unsuccessful. His last attempt was to drown himself in a well. A hologram opened in front of him with a notification about receiving glasses A and then information about himself. Bei was surprised that he was in the system. Having studied the information, he began to think about the fact that he had finally received the trainer that was necessarily included in the time travel kit, but there was something he didn't understand. He ran into the old man and asked why he was dissatisfied. The old man stood up to defend himself and asked how he could be dissatisfied with the fact that the young master refused to meet with the Shangguan family in the main hall. In a half-whisper, the old man said that he was a servant and therefore could not be dissatisfied even if his salary was lowered. That was his job. The gentleman chuckled and replied that the old man seemed quite sincere, so they should let go of this conversation and start changing clothes. He decided to change his clothes and go meet the father and daughter that Elder Du had mentioned. This meant that the easy gathering of anger points was about to begin. There was talk in the hall. The man was calming the respected Jiang and asking him not to get upset. He was convincing that his son would be able to cultivate in a couple of years, and when that happened he would make himself an heir. The man's daughter Shang Guan sighed heavily and asked him to stop talking about Zhang Bei and asked when Brother Nan would return because she missed him so much. Zhang Nan was the eldest son of the Zhang family. He had good natural abilities, great ambitions, and was never interested in worldly vanity. And the youngest son had ordinary abilities and was always finding trouble from idleness. The father wanted to marry his youngest son to this girl. As soon as possible, he thought it was his best option. He introduced him as a very talented person and asked him to appreciate him. Jiang Bei appeared in the hall with a rose in his teeth. Everyone stared at him in surprise and didn't say a word. The father immediately ran up to his son and began to scold him for putting on complete nonsense. He pulled feathers from his clothes and emphasized that only peacocks spread their tails in front of a female like that. After that, the father took Jiang Bei to meet the Shangguan family. Jiang Bei was very polite and greeted everyone separately, showing his respect. Shangguan didn't even look at him and replied that she was glad to see him but would be even happier to see his brother. Her father wasn't happy with such a groom either. He did not hesitate for long and stated that he could not give his daughter to this family. He emphasized that if it had been the eldest son, the conversation would have been different. Jiang Bei quickly realized that this person did not come to them with good intentions and mentally asked everyone not to blame themselves. The young man replied that he apparently had eyes but without pupils and also a thick neck. And he was only 35. Mr. Shan also got furious from such words. Shangguan called the young man a dog and asked where he got the courage to insult her and her father. Jiang Bei glanced at the girl and asked her to let him say something to her, and was immediately surprised that he was called a dog. She didn't mince words and replied that the girl could be confused with a pig from close up and with a broom from afar, and on her head she had a pipidaster made of chicken feathers with a couple of glass balls. From somewhere he took out a green hat and replied that it had saved him a lot in cold times, but the girl would need it more, although it would be better to give her a whole carpet. After these words, the young man turned around and walked away, not paying attention to the screams of his failed bride and her father, as well as the indignant screams of his own. The consequences of such expressions of Jiang Bei on the glass in the woodshed. His father was furious. He kicked his son so that he fell and shouted that he had worked so hard to get consent for this marriage, now his son should go and think about his behavior. His father left his sparring partner and servant Pan Hu with him. Jiang Bei demanded to know why he was assigned this fat man and not some curvy girl. The father couldn't stand it and threw more books at him, which hit him right in the face. Jiang Bei shook himself and saw that these were fighting techniques and strategies. His father, without even turning to him, ordered him to read these books diligently. Just before leaving, the father stopped and glanced sideways at his son. He said that he had taken all his money and now his son could not even think about having fun. This worried Jiang Bei the most. This act was the biggest blow. He immediately started shouting that his father was too cruel. He began swearing that he would definitely do everything necessary if only they would return his money. But his father replied that until his son mastered at least one technique, he would not receive anything. Jiang Bei covered his face with his hand in despair that he would have to start doing this again. Even Pan, who was surprised that the master still agreed with his father's decision. After this unpleasant conversation, the system gave a notification about the promotion. This made Jiang Bei happy, and he realized that it might be possible to avoid the necessary training and meditation. He pressed the button to confirm the training level increase. He suddenly felt very hot. Jiang Bei guessed that it might be due to the level increase, but along with this heat, he felt a certain lightness throughout his body. But then Jiang Bei discovered that he didn't have enough activation points. Pan, whose servant, seeing that his master was behaving strangely, asked if everything was okay. Jiang Bei twitched and nervously asked how long the servant had been watching him. Pan, who thought about what he had heard from master earlier. This could be the reason for the heat that Master Jiang Bei felt. Jiang Bei thought that with his character it would not be difficult to find enemies who would help him earn wrath points, and asked Pan Hu for a favor. But when Pan Hu heard this request, he replied with regret in his voice that they did not have money to hire someone. Pan Hu exhaled heavily and saying that he could offer him an alternative appeared in the form of a girl. Jiang Bei began jumping up and down in disgust, calling Pan Hu names and shouting that no one needed him and that it was the enemy that was needed. Jiang Bei could not stand it and slapped the servant. Pan Hu fell to his knees and rubbed his wound, begging for mercy and declaring that Jiang Bei had just enough. Pan Hu said that Jiang Bei's main enemy was Master Chenju. Jiang Bei immediately jumped up, saying that the master would be their lucky man that day. Pan Hu tried to stop him, shouting that he had not said everything. By evening, the important events had moved to the Yongdu Inn. That evening Miss Yan-lan finally arrived. The girl told her guests that it was precisely because of Yan-lan's visit that the dinner would be special. The girl pointed to Miss Yan-lan, who was hiding in a translucent tent, and said that she had heard about local talent, so she hoped to meet new friends through the poetry evening. The topic of the meeting at that time was flower. The girl asked to use this word in her works and emphasized that the author of the best work will get a chance to talk to her mistress. Many in the crowd began to shout and ask to choose him. Jiang Bei stood behind the crowd and thought that it all looked familiar and assumed that the girl must have been the owner standing in the yard and looked very good. Suddenly Pan, who announced that he had found Jiang Bei's enemy. This man came to the tent and introduced himself as a member of the Qin family. This was Jiang Bei's enemy. The young gentleman looked closely at his opponent and became a little nervous. Jiang Bei was focused on Master Chen's gaze, which was covered by a fan. He said that most likely no one would argue with him being the first instead of the master. He clenched his hands tightly into fists and prepared himself. He thought about the fact that this man killed him in his past life, and in this one he also remained his sworn enemy, but now he has the opportunity to get even. Master Chen asked the girl what her favorite flower was. He dressed as quickly as possible to win her heart. His favorite flower was peonies. He said that peonies like him were noble and magnificent. But suddenly someone from the outside began to laugh at his words and said that the chrysanthemum has no right to compare itself with the peony. When Master Chen turned around, he saw Jiang Bei in front of him looking straight at him and grinning. The master began to loudly protest against such impudence. Thanks to this incident, Jiang Bei immediately gained anger points on his account and smiled even more. Jiang Bei turned to the master and said that because of his appearance he was probably often compared to a chrysanthemum. Many in the hall began to laugh and say that it was true. The master began to shout at everyone and forbid to believe in this nonsense. Jiang Bei smiled and said that today he will be kind and will not once again emphasize this to the respected public. Master Chen turned blue with rage. He was ready to tear the young man apart right there on the spot in front of dozens of people. The master rushed towards the young master and shouted how dare he publicly humiliate him. The higher the man's rage increased, the more points Jiang Bei received. Master Chen only thought about how he couldn't lose face in front of Miss Yan-lan, and this was able to stop him a little. He immediately turned around and said let's go the other way and said that he would not get involved with Jiang Bei. I think that all that is needed is to be able to calm down his anger and let the words spoken in his direction pass by. Jiang Bei did not calm down and said that there was nothing more beautiful than blooming peonies and began to make faces at the master's back. The points of anger continued to grow. Jiang Bei said that no flower could compare to the peony in the tenderness of its petals. Master Chen tried his best to control himself, his anger increasing, as did Jiang Bei's anger points. The crowd picked up on these antics. Now the entire hall was laughing at the master and throwing humiliating jokes at him. Jiang Bei walked behind the master. Here he was practically shaking with anger and shouted to Jiang Bei when he could speak out because he couldn't do it anymore. Jiang Bei smiled very broadly and asked to be called daddy. For this phrase a whole 100 points of anger were added to his balance. This was the last straw, and Master Chen lost his temper and began to harshly curse the young man and make ugly gestures. Jiang Bei was only happy about this because he managed to collect anger points and now he can improve his performance. He hadn't even had time to leave the hall when a girl approached him, and it was hard not to notice her. She smiled and asked if she could ask the young man to write a poem and recite it. Her name was Ho Yan-lan. She was only 19 years old, but many already knew and admired her. The girl was incredibly beautiful and Jiang Bei couldn't take his eyes off her. He thought out loud about this beautiful girl's proposal and smiled. His smile continued to widen, and it seemed that the young man would only be very happy with such an offer. Well, it was very unexpected even for himself that he refused. Master Chen, hearing this, completely lost his temper. I don't understand. Why was this young man so cool that he could refuse such a lady? The master began to laugh, emphasizing that he only knew how to make jokes, but when it came to something worthwhile, he always tucked his tail between his legs. The whole crowd supported the master and began to say that Jiang Bei was the loser of the whole family. These words could not leave the young gentleman indifferent, and he jumped over the railing and immediately found himself in the lady's tent and began to talk about flowers. He landed right at her feet. He wasn't worried about getting into trouble and was extremely self-confident. He met the girl's gaze and did not allow this connection to break. After thinking for a bit, he declared that he loved only one lotus, and because it came out of the mud it was not at all soiled by it. Continuing, he said that he was washed by pure ripples, but he did not know any capricious whims. Jiang Bei continued to stand in the tent near the girl and read his poem about the lotus. The girl moved a little to the side and after listening to his lines thought that he really loved this flower very much. She listened to the lines that said that the smell from it the further the better, and it was slender, tall, and growing clearly. She thought that the young man described this plant very vividly. The girl was delighted. It seemed to her that the young man was in love with this flower and wrote poetry so beautifully. The young gentleman sat down in the chair and continued to read the poem. I know for sure that everything is going well for him, and he watched the girl's behavior. With his last sentence, the young man declared that it was impossible to play with the lotus, and for greater effect, he took out his sword. The girl gasped with delight. She really was captivated by both the young gentleman himself and his essay about the lotus. Miss Yanlan fell to her knees, and a maid immediately ran up to her trying to figure out if everything was okay with her mistress. The girl opened her eyes and said that it was a great poem and asked Huaner to write it down. The miss thought that this was the young master's way of showing respect to her and thought that it was necessary to meet such a talented person. The maid turned to the young master and said that his literary talent was very good. Yanlan interrupted her and suggested that Jiang Bei drink tea and continue the conversation. And Jiang Bei smiled and raised his hand saying that in that case he needed to rent a room for one night rather than just drink tea. The girl was confused by these words and her maid screamed that he was a walker. I was able to say this to Miss Yanlan, and the pillars heard indignant cries. Master Chun Yu Action Foreheads shouted that if Jiang Bei dares to ruin the girl then they will fight. Jiang Bei pretended not to understand what the whole crowd was angry about. Well, he was so pleased to watch the sudden appearance of a large number of points on his account. Miss Yanlan didn't know what to do with herself. Suddenly the young gentleman seemed very rude to her, and she was offended that she considered him talented and knowledgeable of etiquette. She was very disappointed in him. Well, his poems were the best in the competition, and she could not refuse. Miss Yanlan took a step forward. She was extremely scared, but before she could say anything Jiang Bei himself said that the girl apparently agreed to everything. Seeing that the anger points were almost collected, Jiang Bei turned around and walked towards the exit saying that he would leave all the payment to Miss Yanlan was very surprised that he was leaving and asked him again. The young master turned around and confirmed that he was definitely leaving and asked why the girl was so worried about it. Yanlan immediately smiled and said that she had no more questions and wished the gentleman a good night. The whole crowd became even louder because they thought of a completely different proposal from Jiang Bei. The master's servant Pan, who also ran after him. Miss Yanlan was once again mistaken about Jiang Bei. Her opinion changed again, and she realized that he was not rude at all and was still nice to her. The next day Jiang Bei woke up quite late. He still felt unrest and yawned constantly. Very quickly he met his servant, who said that the previous evening the master had been very good, although previously his competence in art had not been noticeable. In addition, the servant noticed that the new techniques that the master was mastering were also beautiful. The master was surprised that he was being followed again, and the servant explained that he was so involved that he most likely did not notice something was present. Jiang Bei smiled because he learned all these techniques in just 3 seconds instead of the huge amount of time he could have spent on them. Pan, who suggested that they immediately return to his father and tell him such wonderful news, but Jiang Bei waved his finger at him. The gentleman smiled and said that they shouldn't have returned until they had eaten. Pan, who wanted to object and remind them that the gentleman had taken all their money. Jiang Bei smiled at this and promised that they would solve everything because he had a large family and must have some property or something like that. His family had a lot of property. If you wanted to get money directly, you had to go to the village that brought in money. To Jiang Bei it sounded like a very rich land, and he guessed that it was a gambling house. Jiang Bei and his servant immediately went to this village and immediately met a poor man near its gate. The master and Pan, who froze in place when they saw where they had come. The gentleman began to shake Pan, who indignant that where they came there was no money and there were only slums around. The servant explained that this place was called the money-making village and that their family collected rent here. After several large families of city lords received this land, they leased it to refugees and farmers and then regularly collected rent and taxes. She said that this year there was a severe drought and they did not pay for more than a month. Jiang Bei was very angry and kept shaking poor Pan Hu and asked if they had come there to intimidate these honest farmers into giving them their money. Smogla asked the gentleman to calm down, but suddenly they were distracted by some scream. Swearing could be heard from somewhere in the depths of the slums. It was Shang Guan. She was holding one of the village girls by the hair and yelling at her for getting her skirt wet with their dirty water. The girl was crying very loudly and that she hadn't done it on purpose. There was also a little girl standing nearby who said that it was not dirty water but spring water that they brought from 10 kilometers away. Shang Guan hit the girl so hard that she flew back saying what she was not allowed to say. Shang Guan bent down and picked up one of the shards of the water pot that lay broken on the ground. Shang Guan turned to the girl she was holding by the hair and said that since she had ruined her clothes, she would have to ruin her face. Sha Guan tried to cut the girl's face with this sharp clay shard, although she begged her not to do it through tears. Fortunately, Shang Guan didn't have time to harm the girl because someone from the outside called her fat. It was Jiang Bei who immediately pounced on Shang Guan, ordering her to let go of the girl. He ran into Shang Guan and she fell to the ground. He slowly approached her and assured her that he did not do it on purpose. He smiled and said that from afar, he saw a demon pig screaming at a little girl and he couldn't sit idly by. Shang Guan shouted loudly at the young master, indignant at how he dared to call her a pig. For this the master received 166 points of anger. Jiang Bei laughed and took out a mirror from somewhere, asked the girl to look at her reflection herself, and received another 300 and some points. Shang Guan loudly complained and called the master a piece of trash with no cultivation who had no right to beat her and insult her. Jiang Bei was not upset at all by these words and calmly replied that he had told the truth. He approached the girl and asked her if this demon pig looked like a human. It was obvious that the girl was very afraid to speak. Jiang Bei slightly humbled the girl and promised that he would protect her and that she could say whatever she wanted. The girl looked at Jiang Bei with tearful eyes and gained some courage. The girl said that Sister Shanguan often came to their village, although she herself was not involved in the money-making, and she really likes to find different reasons to beat and kick them. The girls told her that she had made their father blind. This was beyond any understanding of Jiang Bei, and he became very angry. He pointed his finger at Shangguan and said that she was ugly inside and out and tried to break everything, and she could only be called a demon pig and nothing else. Shangguan couldn't stand such unpleasant words addressed to her any longer and started yelling at the girls that she would definitely teach them a lesson soon. These words were enough for Jiang Bei to rush out and deal with Shangguan. He very quickly appeared next to her and said that it was they who should be angry at her and not the other way around. He squeezed her shoulder tightly and stopped her, not letting her get to the children. He said that if the mistress of the pig demon still had a conscience and investigated now, she would apologize to the children. Shangguan grimaced and said that Jiang Bei shouldn't even dream about it, and the children even more so. Jiang Bei pushed the girl roughly again and said that she was not worthy of being an adult. The girl grabbed her flushed cheek where the blow landed. She shook slightly and looked at the guy in surprise and asked where he got his cultivation from. He gave her another slap and said that he didn't have to report this to her. He continued to beat her. He said that she was so ugly that even his principle of not hitting women no longer worked because she did terrible things and was completely heartless and disgusting. The children were very grateful to him for such protection. He hit her again. I say it was the last blow to her pig nose, and now she could leave 5 stars for her appearance and personality. Having dealt with her, he approached the children. But Shangguan quickly rose to her feet. She was shaking with anger and hissed a curse at the young master. She called him an animal and swore that she would not let him go. Jiang Bei turned back to her and was surprised that she was unhappy with her beautiful appearance after his fists, and asked if she wanted to receive 2 more blows. Here all of Shangguan's courage suddenly disappeared somewhere and tears of fear appeared in her eyes. At this point Pan, whose servant, intervened and reminded her that she was the daughter of the Shang family and that I should not have gone too far. Jiang Bei asked her not to worry and said that his skills had improved so quickly. When his father saw it, everything would be fine. The servant disagreed with him and thought that they had already crossed the line too far. At this time, one of the girls turned to the master. She said that what happened was her fault and that of her sister, and putting her little hand to her heart, she asked to notify them if anything happened. Jiang Bei smiled and patted the girl on the cheeks and asked her not to say that she would take responsibility because he was not yet such a bastard to demand such a thing from a child. After this, Jiang Bei noted that the children's water tank had been broken, and they probably needed to fill it with water again. The girl confirmed this and said that this year they had a severe drought and had to carry water from Mount Qingchuan. The gentleman looked sadly at the fact that the only source of water was so far away, and the efficiency of using labor was very low. It was not surprising that the harvest was poor, but in his time they would have simply pulled a water pipe. When the gentleman thought about the water supply, the idea of building a canal immediately came to his mind. Pan, who hearing this, immediately began to worry about financing because it would cost a huge amount of money. Zhang Bei smiled and replied that this was indeed the case and ordered him to go to his father and ask for 50,000 not only for the canals but also for the construction of roads. He hurried them by noting that they had only 4 hours to raise money and bring workers since the canal had to be dug for the sowing season. Everyone immediately ran off to do their job. Immediately one of the little girls brought an old man who immediately declared that he was the headman of this village and had come because the girl told him about the situation. The old man bowed and thanked the gentleman for saving his granddaughters. Next came the young man who thanked him for saving his children. Zhang Bei smiled back and noted that the village chief had come at the right time, as he had just come up with a plan to revive the money village and asked to listen to him, and the plan, which was basically divided into 3 stages. The first stage was to dig a canal from the nearby mountain to the money village to provide irrigation for agriculture. The second stage consisted of purchasing seeds of fruits and vegetables growing at different times of the year in neighboring villages and towns, which provided a guaranteed harvest every season. The third stage of the refugee and the young people in the village will form a troupe of itinerant traders and will sell local fruits and vegetables, making money on the price difference. The village elder's eyes lit up, and he noted that the plan was really good and was surprised that they hadn't thought of it earlier. The fourth point Zhang Bei noted was that this year they will be exempt from tax, and from next year only 20% will be involved. The old man approached the master and began to thank him for his kindness and wanted to bow very low on behalf of the entire village, but Zhang Bei did not allow this and asked the old man to stand up. It was at that moment that 3 guys appeared behind Zhang Bei and turned to the young master and called him worthless. One of these guys wondered if the taxes could change just by Zhang Bei's wish. This was the 9th level of Liang Hechuan's Qi gathering. Zhang Bei didn't know this particular person and asked about it. The old man almost whispered that this young man was the second son of one of the 4 major families, the Liang family, and told him his name. Liang Hechuan smiled maliciously and noted that he heard from his brother Qinju that Zhang Bei had become arrogant, but at first he didn't believe it, but now they see that he has really become bolder. Zhang Bei once again threw her a joke that he was a good older brother and called him a very unpleasant disease. Liang Hechuan noted that this village was truly a nest of pigs and dogs. He immediately rushed at the young gentleman, wanting to bring him to his senses by giving him a good beating. Zhang Bei only thought that this was an opportunity to try out new techniques. He immediately jumped up and ran towards his opponent. Liang Hechuan was surprised at how quickly Zhang Bei approached him. Liang Hechuan didn't have time to react before the young master's first blow landed on his side. He flew to the side and was very surprised at how that trash from the Zhang family had made such progress in just a few days. But he still didn't think that he would be able to withstand such a strong opponent as he considered himself to be. But suddenly someone from the outside called him a pervert. The elder sister covered the younger sister's eyes and asked her not to look. One of Liang Hechuan's men turned to his master and asked him to look down, although he was very embarrassed to say so. When he looked at himself, he noticed that his shirt was torn on his chest in 2 places, exposing his nipples, and a hole was shining on his pants, showing the color of his underwear. Zhang Bei barely held back his laughter and clicked his tongue, and said that it was very unexpected that young Master Liang could have such a hobby. Master Liang immediately understood who did this to him. Zhang Bei laughed and asked who asked the master to move while he was being attacked. Mr. Liang replied that he would not bother Zhang Bei today and said goodbye, to which Zhang Bei asked if he was not going to teach him a lesson. I will not just let the tax issue slide. Mr. Liang got even more angry and said that the young master was taking too much liberty and had gone too far. Mr. Zhang chuckled and asked if Liang Hechuan still allowed himself to talk to his father like that. Mr. Liang hissed that the young man was not his father, but he grabbed both his cheeks with one hand and squeezed his face. He smiled and said that Liang Hechuan should let his father teach him the 3 words properly today, and it would be better to remember it. Zhang Bei continued to mock and humiliate Mr. Liang Hechuan. He laughed at this. Zhang Bei didn't know that his father was watching this. His servant told him that the young master had not only taken the path of a cultivator but had also mastered the soul technique. Mr. Jiang couldn't believe his eyes that in just one night this child had transformed from an ordinary mortal man into a Qi realm opener. The servant continued to tell that when they did not hear that the young master was looking for money, they thought that he was creating problems again, so they immediately rushed to the village. No one expected that the young man would arrange such a surprise. The old man assumed that Mr. Liang Hechuan would not be able to withstand the next blows and asked if he should stop the master's son. But the master stopped him and noted that someone else was coming. Jiang Bei continued to whip Mr. Liang. He asked why he was silent because only bad students slept in class and did not answer. A man appeared next to the young master and ordered him to stop immediately. Jiang Bei felt a very strong pressure on himself and immediately froze. The man immediately went to the beaten gentleman. Jiang Bei guessed that judging by his appearance he could be Liang Hechuan's father. Jiang Bei turned to Uncle Liang and noted that this grandson did not know how to communicate properly and asked him to allow him to teach him. Mr. Liang replied that even if this child did not know how to speak, there was no point in teaching him, and especially not in this way. Jiang Bei noted that he had always been reasonable, and if it had just been a verbal altercation he would never have led to violence, but his actions in his training could only be considered self-defense. He continued and said that some dogs and puppies really like to bite people indiscriminately, and at this point Mr. Liang decided to take revenge for his son. He pounced on the guy and said that the young man from the Jiang family had gone too far in bullying others. Jiang Bei noticed that this man's roar was very ferocious. If he hadn't raised his level, his organs would have been destroyed. But he also noticed that this man was pouring out a lot of anger points and he would be able to collect some and run away. Jiang Bei asked what was wrong with him, mocking Liang Hechuan, and suggested that the gentleman come over and hit himself if he dared. His father's assistant took it upon himself to think that the young master had simply gone mad because the opponent was much stronger. Mr. Jiang tomorrow in the face with his hand, remembering that his son had spoken of wanting some difficulties, but now he was causing nothing but trouble. Mr. Liang was incredibly angry, but this gave Jiang Bei a big bag of anger. The master called upon the fiery eagle and shouted that the young man would soon be finished. Jiang Bei jumped to the side but did not understand what was happening. It felt like he was encountering the mysterious eagle palm for the first time. Mr. Liang noted that the young man tried to dodge his attacks. From the side you listened to crick. They shouted at Mr. Liang and called him a shameless robber, asking what kind of force was necessary. Jiang Bei had no choice but to cover himself and dodge the fire attacks. But suddenly someone killed the fire eagle protecting young master Jiang Bei. Mr. Liang, you are very surprised that his mysterious eagle palm was broken. He immediately realized that there must be a much stronger master nearby than he was. Finally Mr. Jiang came out of the shadows and called his son. Jiang Bei looked around and thought that it looked like the crisis had been averted and noted that his father looked scared. The young man smiled and thought that it would be nice if his father hired a powerful bodyguard for him. Mr. Liang backed down but demanded that he apologize to his son, and the Liang family would grant forgiveness. Liang Hechuan was against this and was indignant that his father would forgive him so easily despite their reputation. Mr. Liang ordered his son to shut up and noted that a powerful master was present today and asked whether his son wanted to save face or his life. Jiang Bei picked at her ear and replied that it was impossible to apologize. Mr. Liang was surprised that young Master Jiang did not have even a little respect for him. Jiang Bei replied that it was not that he did not want it but that they never had a reputation. This completely drove Mr. Liang crazy. He literally boiled with anger, his eyes narrowed and filled with blood, ready to tear the young man apart for such talk. But he understood that he could pay for it and tried to control himself. He approached the young man and said that he underestimated him. Through clenched teeth he asked him if he really thought that no one would touch him. Jiang Bei smiled and reminded that Mr. Liang was already very strange and incapable of anything, and declared that he would stand right in front of him without a single movement. And if he wanted to do something here, then let him do something. Master Jiang wanted to rush to help Jiang Bei, but Master Jiang grabbed his hand and replied that there was no need for that. The master noted that the master had such a strong killing intent that Jiang Bei was now safe, and Liang Wenqi probably felt it too. Mr. Liang suddenly felt that there was a strong killing intent on the roof of the building behind him. He realized that if he allowed this child to get hurt in front of him, everything would be bad. His Liang family could get into big trouble. Jiang Bei also knew this, and so he smiled broadly while looking straight into the master's eyes. He still managed to joke and asked the gentleman what was wrong, noting that he was most likely struck by his attractiveness. Mr. Liang turned away and retreated, convincing himself that he could endure all this antics. Jiang Bei extended his hand to the master and asked if he had given him permission to go. He pulled him by the collar and began to call him names very rudely and humiliate him even more, proving his worthlessness. The gentleman was silent, and Jiang Bei began to laugh at this and noted that the old man was trying to look cool, but he was already drooling over the ancient grave for himself. Suddenly Mr. Jiang felt almost faint from what his ears had heard. Jiang Bei, having mocked him, replied with satisfaction that Mr. Liang could go, and that he shouldn't be angry, otherwise he might faint, and if that happened he would break the flowers of the plant to spoil the cityscape. This was the last straw, and Mr. Liang screamed loudly, crimson with rage, that he could not go on like this any longer. For this Jiang Bei received a huge amount of anger points. After Mr. Liang's shout, eagles began to fly to the village. And Jiang Bei couldn't help but say something else because someone covered his mouth. Someone came from the side and asked Mr. Liang to stop shouting and calm down. The master came out and, turning to Mr. Liang, explained that today's incident was his son's fault, and everyone hoped that Mr. Liang would be able to turn a blind eye to his mistakes and the incident would be closed. Mr. Liang replied that he had already informed their families of Jiang Bei's actions through the messenger falcon and that justice must be sought for the Liang family. The falcon actually flew to report on everything that had happened. When Mr. Liang left, Jiang Bei began to laugh at the old man for resorting to chatter at his age, and that it was shameful, but the master asked him to simply refrain from unnecessary words and remain silent, covering her face with her hand in shame. Jiang Bei smiled and agreed to change the topic. He noticed that the old man suddenly appeared and asked if he came to bring 50,000 silver. The master smiled and took something out of his pocket and replied that he had only brought this. Soon Jiang Bei found himself in his family's kitchen, where he was hung upside down in an attempt to punish him. His father was yelling at him, asking how he could have lied like that. The father was angry that his son had caused so much trouble. Jiang Bei tried to calm him down and let him explain everything. The father exhaled and ordered his son to speak. Jiang Bei said that after he escaped last night, he first went to Yundu's restaurant and met Chen Zhou there and exchanged poetry and literary works. Mr. Jiang asked why he heard that his son had humiliated Chen Zhou. Jiang Bei continued to tell the story that in the morning he accidentally ran into Miss Shan Guan in the money village, and there was a small disagreement. Mr. Jiang exhaled heavily and asked what this disagreement was. The young man was slightly covered in beads of sweat, and looking away he replied that he had hit the girl. Mr. Jiang immediately jumped up from his seat and started shouting that his son was a shameless child, and in less than a day he managed to offend all the families. His son tried to explain that they were all evil, but his father would not listen. Mr. Jiang said that he would have to teach his son a lesson, but suddenly Pan Hu burst into the room shouting that something serious had happened. He reported that the Shanguan family and the Chun family requested the presence of the master and young master. Master Jiang thought to himself that trouble was knocking on their door. Jiang Bei thought that the Avengers were gathering together and that there was another big wave of points to collect. This news only made him happy. Jiang Bei choked when he saw those he had offended. One asked those who came if their appearance was the work of his son. Shangguan forgot that it was all because of him and he destroyed her beautiful appearance. Mr. Jiang thought about how his son had suddenly become strong in both literature and martial arts. And fortunately he had not encountered him last night. Everyone demanded that Jiang Bei bow and apologize to everyone he had offended, otherwise he would be in trouble. Jiang Bei shouted that there was a disgusting creature that only thought of offending others. It caused even more noise among those who came to complain about the young master. Mr. Jiang slapped his son and told him to stop immediately. Jiang Bei said that he would not apologize to the group of losers. Mr. Jiang again told his son to shut up and said that they would say what was useful because that way the trouble from him would stop. The gentleman exhaled heavily and said that of course he was used to all this, but it had to stop. Jiang Bei at this time thought and was surprised that it was actually easy to talk to his father. Mr. Jiang emphasized that all the trouble was caused by Jiang Bei and sighed heavily again. The crowd in front of them was expecting an apology and didn't understand why the Jiang family was still sitting and silent. Mr. Jiang turned to his son and said that he should sort out today's farce. Jiang Bei smiled in confusion and asked what exactly his father meant. He immediately received a huge slap in the face and didn't even have time to understand what happened. The blow was strong and he flew into the center of the hall. This offended the young gentleman a little because he was the biological child of the father who had just pushed him with all his might. Mr. Shang was furious and indignant at how this damn guy dared to turn his treasures like a flower and jasper into who knows what. Jiang Bei exhaled and said that if she were a flower, even cows and sheep would not dare to defecate on her. For this, the young master was awarded almost 1,000 anger points. The young man opened her portrait and drew her father's attention to her original appearance, which was already ugly. He declared that first-class cosmetic work had been done on her face. It was very difficult for everyone present to admit that the young man was right. Even Shangguan's father could not object to him. Mr. Liang spoke up, thinking that if they couldn't sort things out with the girl, they were obliged to do the same with his son. The young man asked if they went to the slums to remind people of themselves and noted that the tailor had come to the village without a measuring tape. Jiang Bei pointed out that they had a severe drought this year, and it was okay if they didn't help farmers solve their problems, but they also allowed their children to oppress ordinary people and called them a couple of cattle. After which the young master turned to Mr. Chen and immediately raised his hands up and noted that there was no hostility between them, and he did not wish to participate in this any further. Jiang Bei smiled and asked the master not to be a coward and say everything since he came. Master Chen turned away and said that he did not want to get involved with Jiang Bei at all. Mr. Jiang, observing everything that was happening, noted that although this child could act like a scoundrel, but deep down he was a good person and he did not retreat in front of the heads of large families. Mr. Liang approached him and asked if he had anything to say. Mr. Jiang chuckled and asked what he wanted to hear. Mr. Liang then noted that Jiang Bei had made unauthorized changes to the agricultural tax and was still being treated leniently. Mr. Jiang responded that Mr. Liang was winding himself up. He claimed that he was the one who asked this man to handle agricultural tax issues. The gentleman then said that regarding their children getting into fights, he couldn't control it and young people need some bumps and bruises to grow up. Jiang Bei couldn't believe that his father was actually covering for him. Mr. Liang noticed the face of your son who had a tooth knocked out and asked if it was really just a bump and bruise, and the daughter of the Shangguan family looked absolutely terrible. Mr. Jiang said that it would be better for the younger generation if conflicts and grievances were not resolved by elders, and that it would be less unsightly. Jiang Bei intervened and looked at Liang Hechuan and Shangguan, asking them to come over, and suggested that they have a competition where the two of them would be against him alone. The two tried to avoid another fight, knowing that they couldn't resist Jiang Bei. At that moment, one of the ambassadors ran through the door and announced the news. He reported that the Yushir Palace people were outside the city. Lord Jiang, hearing this, jumped up in his chair. Jiang Bei thought about it. He didn't understand why the atmosphere suddenly became so tense. Moreover, he didn't know Zhou Wuwang, whose arrival had made the heads of all the big families tense. This Zhou Wuwang was the king's general. Everyone in the hall began to fuss and run away, and Jiang Bei's father also pulled him along. Mr. Liang was surprised that they were leaving. They would meet the general. Mr. Jiang turned around and said that no matter where they went, they would not meet the general. Mr. Liang pointed out that the military king held a high position and wielded power, and as members of the city's distinguished Lian clan, they should take the initiative to greet them. Mr. Jiang replied that they could do such superficial gestures on their own, and there was no need to take him and his son along. Mr. Liang and the other families immediately became angry and said that they were being underestimated and that the military king was also being underestimated. Mr. Jiang called them a bunch of cowards and demanded that they stop making baseless accusations against him. A small skirmish broke out between the heads of families. They were all at their limit, but it only took one blow from Mr. Jiang to put down the heads of the other families. Jiang Bei looked at his father with admiration and said that he was amazing because he dealt with all three without losing. Jiang Bei turned to Liang Hechuan and asked him to lower his head and stand up and to be careful when leading his uncles and elderly people to the western heavens. He only responded with curses. When the Jiang family left the hall, the young gentleman asked his father what technique he had used and asked him to teach him the same, but his father assured him that his son, being at the yellow level, would not be able to learn it. Jiang Bei was surprised to hear about some yellow level and asked his father about it again. He explained that martial arts had 4 levels of cultivation and the first was yellow. His brother was a strong cultivator at the 2nd stage of the Earth realm and Du was a strong cultivator at the Heavenly realm. Jiang Bei asked his father what level he was at. I guess he was also at the level of the Heavenly realm. The father briefly replied that his level would only be known to his son in the future. The young master wondered if martial cultivation was not divided into 4 levels and created to be so mysterious. Someone called from the young master's side. It was Pan Hu who was holding a note that Yanlan had asked him to give him. The master remembered that it was the girl who had paid for their room that night. He was wondering why the girl was giving him this note, but when he saw the contents he was even more surprised. The note contained only a few words. The girl asked to save her. They immediately went to the Yunda restaurant and found that the Imperial Guards were standing around the building. Pan Hu replied that he had heard that the man the Martial King was looking for was inside the restaurant. Yanlan was nervous and wondered why young Master Jiang had not yet arrived to her. Her assistant replied that they had only seen him once, and he was under no obligation to come to her aid, and that they should find a way to escape. The girl wanted to object, but suddenly some noise was heard. Very suddenly Master Jiang Bei himself appeared in front of her smiling and waving his hand greeting her. The girl was very happy to see him, but suddenly noticed that his nose was bleeding. The young gentleman assured that everything was fine with him, and asked what had happened to the girl, noting that he had received a letter about her danger. Jiang Bei reminded him that the girl had once helped him pay for the room, and asked him to get ready because they would be leaving through a large hole in the roof. The girl looked down and handed him a handkerchief. She explained that this handkerchief was given to her by her mother who loved lotus flowers very much. Jiang Bei was a little confused because he had wiped the blood from his nose with this handkerchief. And now it became clear to him why the girl was upset about this. The girl said that her mother wanted her to become something like a lotus flower with her own thoughts and ideas. The girl exhaled heavily and added that everything did not go as planned. Jiang Bei noted that the girl looked quite upset and thought about how he could console her. I thought for a bit he decided that I could cheer up the second part of the Lotus Code. He continued reading the poem from the place where he had left off on that very night of their first meeting. The girl listened and understood what poem he was reading. She was definitely enchanted by him. He liked her and his reading was wonderful. She came closer to him and turned to him looking straight into his eyes. But suddenly they heard screams in the street which distracted them. People burst into the restaurant and one of the guys started yelling at the young gentleman for daring to offend the miss. The young man did not calm down. I shouted that I had just seen with my own eyes how he hugged the lady and did not want to let go. He called Jiang Bei a lecherous bastard and was sure that he probably wanted to do something unworthy to Miss Yanlan. The lady turned to Commander Yang and noted that he had misunderstood everything, and that this gentleman was her friend from the city of Luyun, and having heard that she was getting married soon, he had specially come to visit her. The commander fell silent but still reminded that the lady was the beloved daughter of King Wu, and it would be better for her not to communicate with commoners. Jiang Bei smiled and replied that he never expected that the lady would turn out to be a princess. The commander chuckled, surprised that this could not be known, and noted that this meant that they did not have such a close relationship. The commander asked him to leave and he would pretend that he had not seen anything and began to throw Jiang Bei out of the restaurant. The master thought that these guys probably wanted to take her back to the palace, but judging by her face she did not want it. There for a moment he thought about what he should do. Jiang Bei said that he was sorry, but since Princess Yanlan called him a friend, he couldn't stay away. The princess became nervous from these words. Jiang Bei noted to himself that he had accumulated so much rage but had never used it, and after the upgrade he should have been able to fight on equal terms. The young gentleman said that he and the princess had met at a poetry evening, and let's note that now there will be a problem. He began to read the first line of the poem. The commander objected that they were warriors and the poems were unknown. Jiang Bei ignored this and ordered to listen to the second line, where he began to swear very unpleasantly. The commander immediately flew at him, furious that they were trying to insult him. Jiang Bei noted that this was not an insult but an education. Since the commander was a fighter he had little, then he would get more, and it was worth listening carefully. The commander was shaking with rage and was ready to get into a fight. Zhang Bei continued to read the poem with a smile which also insulted the commander. At this point, the commander could not stand it any longer and rushed at the young gentleman with his fists. Zhang Bei noted that this guy's sword technique was not so simple and his combat experience was definitely greater than his own, and if the battle dragged on he would definitely find a way to injure, and it was worth ending very quickly. It didn't take him long to figure out what to do. He gripped his club tighter and asked to hear one more line. He said something about a golden stick that could be used to hit scumbags on the head and rushed at the commander. The young gentleman's blow was very strong and stunned his opponent a little. Commander Yen froze a little in place. I tried to recover from the dizziness. But before Commander Yang could come to his senses, the young gentleman began to slap him in the face one after another and continue to read the poem. Soon Commander Yen flew out of the restaurant and broke down the doors. At the entrance he was met by General Liuzhou of the Imperial Guard, who was Yang Qifeng's uncle, and was immediately greeted with a sharp tone. Zhang Bei came out of the restaurant continuing to read his poem with a smile on his face. The general began to shout, interrogating the guy who he was that he dared to beat him so cruelly. Zhang Bei asked if the general himself had manners because before asking his name he should have introduced himself. The princess stood behind him and watched what was happening with fear. She turned to the young gentleman and noted that the general had been the subject of some very bad jokes, and that it was not worth getting involved in a conflict with him once again. She told General Yang Leitang that he was one of her father's most valiant subordinates, and was called the Thunder King of the battlefield. This man single-handedly destroyed an entire lair of 100 dark cultivators in Luyun. Zhang Bei admired and noted to himself that this man was a tough nut to crack. But Zhang Bei looked at the general again and realized that it was too late to run. General Yang stated that he was giving them one last chance to leave, otherwise he would only bring death. Zhang Bei smiled and continued to read his poem line by line. The general replied that the young man spoke fluently and therefore he would break 3 legs and would not kill anyone. Zhang Bei stopped smiling and said that the general shouldn't have raised himself because there were many generals and he didn't specifically say who the poem was about. After this, the young gentleman continued to recite the verse again. General Yang lost his temper. He called the young master an impudent man and was very offended. He was outraged that the small cultivator was at the Shen stage, but on top of that he was insolent and shouted, and the young master would not go anywhere today. The blow to the general was very strong. Zhang Bei was not strong enough to repel such blows, but still he was not that weak. General Yang noted that the young master's stepping technique was truly refined and he was even faster than the Thunder Python. But even with this, the old ginger was much sharper. He used another technique that startled the young master. It was a very powerful blow that knocked the young man off his feet. Due to the severe injury, Zhang Bei's mouth started bleeding and his face became very contorted. The young gentleman noted that the general was a true veteran of the battles and his tactics caught him off guard. Commander Yang began to laugh that Zhang Bei was simply wiped out and was proud of his uncle. Zhang Bei didn't really care about this, and he advised the commander to look in the mirror himself since he had been hit even harder. The commander kept himself in check, but a grin still appeared on his face, and he noted that the gentleman did know how to chat. The commander turned to his uncle and asked him to give Zhang Bei a harder beating, so that he would never be able to open his filthy mouth again. General Yang raised his hammer above himself and said that he would do it with pleasure. But they begged him to stop. Madame Yanlan grabbed his hand and promised to go with him, but in return he would not touch Lord Zhang Bei anymore. Zhang Bei, wiping the blood from his face, asked the girl not to dissuade the general because he was then their 100-year-old turtle. He openly laughed at him and provoked him into aggression. These words were enough for General Yang to pounce on the young man again. Well, this time Zhang Bei was ready for another blow. He shouted that even if he was destined to die, he would definitely drag someone from the Yang family with him. And after that he threw a jug of water. The people were shocked by electricity shaking their skeletons to pieces. After the Yang family fell ill, Zhang Bei thought that he was lucky to dodge in time and did not damage anything important, but Yang Qifeng seemed to be on his last legs. He laughed loudly and replied that he even raised his hand against his relative when the general turned to his lying nephew. This made General Yang even more angry, and he began to curse Zhang Bei. The young gentleman smiled and asked if he was to blame for this, since the safety of the power grid began with the general. He hoped that he would put all the strength he had left into the palm of his soul. This was the last and only chance to defeat General Yang, who would definitely not retreat until the young master stopped breathing. Zhang Bei smiled broadly and noted that the general would now receive his just deserts with the palm of his soul, and used this technique. General Yang just laughed at him, saying that the young man thought that this could save him. General Yang raised his hammer with incredible new strength. He shouted that he was at the first stage of the Earth stage and the youth was only a Shen stage cultivator. He threatened to crush the young master like an ant and raised his hammer. The mod hovered right over the young gentleman, who imagined that he was about to die. But very suddenly an iron ball appeared out of nowhere and hit this huge hammer, preventing the attack. A gentleman who suddenly appeared also addressed him and explained that it was the youth of the infinite mystical iron. General Yang was defeated. The gentleman smiled slightly and greeted his brother, whom he had not seen for a long time. Elder brother Jiang Nan was already at the second stage of the Earth stage. Jiang Bei was very surprised when his brother managed to return. According to the memories of his former body, his brother left home at an early age due to his outstanding abilities and was taken away for training. Jiang Nan approached his younger brother and told him what to wear, saying that he had been in trouble lately and was completely out of control, so he asked him to look after him. Jiang Nan gave the hammer to General Yang, noting that he allowed him to take it back, and apologized for the fact that his younger brother had somehow offended the general. The general explained that Zhang Bei had seriously wounded his nephew and it was impossible to simply hush it up, and ordered the young master to stop hiding behind his brother's back and decide one-on-one. Zhang Bei replied that the general himself was a daredevil, and as soon as he saw his brother, he immediately went in a respectful direction, and since he now had such an assistant, he did not want to fight in a fair fight. The young gentleman's anger points grew and he began to grimace, even more feeling protected, and advised the general to come up and bite if anyone dared. The general said that if given a chance, he would arrange a battle to the death, to which the young gentleman smiled and stepped forward and said that he was waiting. The general had just started walking towards him when Zhang Bei also hid behind his brother's back, continuing to tease the enemy. He jumped back and forth more than General Yang and understood that he would not move against Jiang Nan. Jiang Nan snorted and said that their father was right about the younger one being uncontrollable. Zhang Bei smiled and explained that he spoke differently to different people, and if there was a dog in front of him, why not tease him? General Yang was angry. He knew that the eldest son of the Jiang family was a cultivator of the earth, and if the two of them attacked, he would not be able to cope. By this time his men had arrived and he decided to retreat. He shouted for his men to take the princess and they would return to the palace. Zhang Bei immediately jumped up when he saw the girl being grabbed and ordered everyone to stop. His older brother was shocked at what this kid had achieved when he saw his shadow step. Zhang Bei pounced on the guards and, having scattered them to the sides, declared that they would not take the princess anywhere. The girl was trembling with fear or whispered to be handled with care. The young gentleman freed the princess, asked if everything was okay with her, hugging her, and the girl assured that everything was okay with her. The general roared for Zhang Bei, a commoner, to take his hands off the princess because he was not allowed to touch her. Before he could even take a step, Jiang Nan's ball on a long chain got tangled between his legs and knocked him to the ground. Zhang Bei came a little closer to the general and replied that he and his nephew apparently had poor eyesight, and that they should go to a doctor if they did not see that they wanted to help the princess and share their goodness with her. He noticed that the general's men had come running, tied her up, and held her by force, and they had no respect for their mistress. The general claimed that it was a rebellion against the king, but Zhang Bei assured that they were simply ridding the court of parasites. The general was angry and said that he had seduced the rumored lady and prevented her from returning home, and for such a crime the king would certainly punish. The princess intervened and, turning to the general, emphasized that Mr. Jiang did not force her to do anything, and that she decided to stay herself. General Yang looked at the young master and then at the lady and asked if this guy had gotten her drunk, because the house of King Wu was the richest clone. Jiang Nan intervened in the dialogue and replied that the truth had been revealed and the princess had stayed of her own free will. Jiang Nan promised the general to untie him if he promised not to touch his brother and mistress anymore. The general understood that, at the moment, the balance of power was clearly not in his favor and it was worth agreeing. So he did, and Mr. Jiang was ready to fulfill his promise. The general repeated once again that if he was released, he would not touch the master's younger brother. Jiang Nan agreed with him, but the young master asked him to wait and noted that he had not specifically released anyone. He walked closer to the general and asked if he thought it had been forgotten how his lightning-fast eel attack had smashed him. His nephew had publicly slandered him and caused him moral harm and wrecked the floor of the restaurant. The young gentleman picked up a stone from the floor, while the general asked the little bastard not to be impudent. Jiang Bei laughed and asked the general if he still didn't understand the situation he was in. Jiang Bei clarified that he had only one choice left except his punishment. He said that he had a stone in one hand, and if the general guessed correctly, he would sing a verse from the conquest, but if he chose an empty hand he would get 3 slaps on the back of the head from the branch as a warning. The general spat to the side, folded his arms across his chest, and declared that he would not play such games, for which the young gentleman hit him painfully on the knee. General Yang screamed and began to say that his bone had cracked holding his knee, to which the young gentleman emphasized that he had warned. Jiang Bei smiled and reminded that General Yang was not in a position to refuse anything. The young master put his 2 hands in front of him and General Yang made his choice. He chose an empty hand and was rewarded with 3 slaps on the back of the head. The general shouted that he would sing a better song, but it was too late. Jiang Bei, preparing to give in to the slaps, emphasized that if he lost, he should have been ready to fulfill the conditions. Watching all this, Jiang Nan was astonished that his younger brother dared to humiliate the great General Yang Leitang like that. After this, the elder brother finally decided to untie General Yang and let him go. When the people took the general away, he still shouted that Jiang Bei would pay for this, laughed at him, and suggested that next time before the fight he at least wash himself because he smelled badly. Yan Lan came closer to her savior and asked if he wasn't afraid that General Yang would really take revenge on him, to which the young gentleman assured her that there was no such word in his dictionary at all. He smiled and emphasized that if he could make the lady's life even a little easier, it was an honor for him. He was glad of the indecency that he managed to farm so much rage that day, but he was also glad to help such a beautiful girl who was clearly not indifferent to him. The girl thanked Jiang Bei, but she herself could not understand why her face was burning so much and her heart was beating so fast. The general's men discussed along the way that Jiang Bei most likely used some kind of potion, otherwise the girl could not have been so favorable to him. General Yang regretted that this time it would not be possible to return the lady, and told his people to prepare because upon their return they would be punished by the king. But suddenly someone from the alley shouted that he had a plan to return the lady back to the king. The general's people stopped and asked who the man talking to them was. Chun Ju of the Chun clan of Luyun City appeared from the shadows. The general noted that Chun Ju's cultivation was still at a low level and asked why his friend decided to compete with the young master and lure people away from him. Chun Ju hissed back that he did it because he knew his weak point. He said that as a child he was attacked by an evil spirit outside the city, and this left a deep psychological trauma, and even now the mere mention of evil spirits scared the boy half to death. Chun Ju noted that even if the lie had such an effect, then what could one say about something else? Chun Ju smiled, and 2 more figures appeared in the alley. He brought a real evil spirit, and his assistant brought the monster out of the shadows. The general smiled and noted that it was cruel but an excellent strategy. The general asked what Chun Ju wanted as a reward, and he replied that he had always dreamed of joining the imperial army, but he had never had the chance. General Yang assured him that it was easy to arrange, and that when everything was completed he would personally bring him to the camp. Chun Ju smiled and said that he thanked the general in advance. There was a quarrel as usual in the Jiang family mansion. The father scolded his youngest son again. He was ready to tear him into small pieces for getting into such serious trouble here again. The master tried to stop his master and held him with all his hands and feet so that he would not do anything stupid. Master Jiang assured that he was angry only because his son could not stop and was doing worse and worse things. The princess looked at everything that was happening with huge round eyes and said that she had apparently caused trouble for everyone again. Jiang Nan asked her not to take it to heart because his brother had been like a monkey since childhood and was constantly getting into trouble. They did not calm down, and the father tried to get to his son and punish him somehow, but he hid under the roof and was not going to come down. The father reminded his son that he was only at the Xian stage but was already so impudent, and if he continued in the same spirit, he would simply be killed somewhere outside. All the cultivators below the earth stage were like ants. The father suggested crippling his son and leaving him at home as something useless he would live. Jiang Bei noted that he had already reached the stage of all-in and moved to the second stage of the martial path and no longer considered himself an ant. Father just laughed at this. He said that first there were stages of accumulation and opening of chi which are needed to open the mortal body to prepare it for techniques. This is only the first stage of improvement. Only at the earth stage can one truly use spiritual power and deal multiple damage. To achieve this, simply having the power of the fifth stage of the Shen level is not enough. Both the equipment and the combat equipment must be of the same level. The breakthrough itself will be the most difficult. He warned that if his son failed, there would be a response. Jiang Nan confirmed this and said that he himself was stuck at this stage for 3 years before he was able to break through. Jiang Bei listened and noted that it sounded terribly difficult and the path of perfection was definitely not for the weak. His happiness was systemic and a lot of anger had gathered lately. The system congratulated him and noted that his level had been raised to the 5th level of the Shen stage. The girl who appeared out of nowhere and seemed to be seen only by him gently kissed him on the forehead, and he felt some changes inside himself. But he was still interested in who this girl was, and he asked about it directly. He fell to his knees and his entire family was worried. The princess suggested that this could be a breakthrough, but her father did not believe that it was possible because no one was able to achieve this in a short time. Jiang Bei tried to come to his senses and thought about the girl he saw. He assumed that he might have imagined it. Coming out of some kind of fog, he finally heard his name, heard how he was called. The princess immediately rushed to him and embraced him and began to congratulate him. The young gentleman still did not understand what was happening. His father approached him and explained that his brother was already one of the fastest progressing among the younger generation of cultivators, and he did not believe that the younger one was even more talented. Everyone started asking how Jiang Bei was feeling, and he assured with a wide smile that everything was fine with him and noted that at the 5th stage of the Shen stage there was a lot of spiritual energy and his whole body was breaking with strength. He began to boast that now, even if Chun Liang and that bastard from the Shangguan clan attacked him together, he would not be afraid. The father cleared his throat and noted that he had advanced so quickly today and that he needed to rest and strengthen his spiritual strength. The gentleman was surprised that this old man had suddenly become so polite to him. After this, Mr. Jiang turned to the princess and promised that his family would take care of her, and she could also go on vacation. Jiang Bei sent to his chambers stretched, noting that he could finally rest. The princess turned around after him and exhaled heavily. The girl called him, hoping that he would not reject her. As soon as the young gentleman stopped and turned around, rushed into his arms and pressed herself tightly against him. She raised her head and, looking into his eyes, asked why he was helping her so desperately since they barely knew each other. Jiang Bei confusedly explained to the girl that she once helped him and in return he helped her. The girl thought sadly that he did this only because of his nobility but not because of sympathy for her. The girl couldn't hold back and screamed that he did it because he fell in love with her, but he began to deny it in every possible way and said that she was talking nonsense. He asked the girl to stop, noting that this was not possible. But suddenly the girl gave him a small yellow pea in his hands. When asked about this, the girl explained that it was a spirit restoration pill, and since the gentleman had spent a lot of spiritual strength, it would strengthen the body and replenish its spiritual root. The girl smiled and thanked the young gentleman for everything and said that she was going to rest. Lying in his chambers, the young gentleman thought that if the girl had just wanted to give him pills, she might not have touched him, although he was very happy with her touch. He hugged the pillow and thought that it was very hard for such guys to take care of themselves on the street, especially handsome like him, and began to praise himself as much as he could. Well, suddenly he heard that someone asked him as the owner to stop saying such things. Jiang Bei jumped up. He didn't understand where the sound was coming from. A hologram appeared on the screen in front of him and a sound came from it. His system was talking to him. Jiang Bei basket at mouth from surprise because remembered where heard this voice. He heard it when he pumped up for the last time and saw the system in the form of that girl. The system responded that it was her projection, and when the master made a breakthrough at an important stage, she also evolved, and at first she could only communicate through system windows, but now her personality has awakened. She explained that if the master continues to develop, she will be able to gain a spiritual form, and the functions of the system will become even more powerful. Jiang Bei was delighted and asked if this system was only in his head. The topic confirmed that it had merged with his consciousness. She added that she could read his thoughts and memories. I brought one of the videos that he watched the day before and which he liked. After that, she asked him to think about something decent and not to shove all sorts of nonsense into his head. The gentleman was indignant because she herself looked at the archives and now she was complaining and asked for money for viewing. Suddenly someone knocked on the door of the young master's chambers, and the system noted that he was leaving. Approaching the door, the young gentleman hoped that the lady had come to him and was in anticipation. He opened the doors and wanted to say that he had been waiting for a long time, but what he saw in front of him made him freeze. This was the same monster that Chenju had found. This monster opened its mouth and pounced on the young master. Jiang Bei stepped back and said out loud that it was rare to see a living evil spirit. The evil spirit fell right on the threshold. The young gentleman grimaced at how strongly it stank and was surprised that it was even possible. While the evil spirits were rising, he began to call his family for help, realizing that he could not cope with them on his own. But no one responded to him, and overall there was complete silence in the yard. He looked at the evil spirits that had already practically risen and were ready to pounce on him again because he was worried that no one was answering him. The evil spirits dissolved, and Jiang Bei, looking around, thought that they had really dispersed into the fog and it was unclear where they were. His gaze fell on one of the buildings behind him in the courtyard. I remembered the words of the ancients which said that if you can't fight, then it was worth fighting, and if you can't, then it was worth running away. Jiang Bei chose the second option and ran to the exit. Right on the threshold, from somewhere above, an evil spirit hung down on him and looked into his eyes as if into his soul with its own. Jiang Bei cursed loudly and retreated back to his room. As it turned out, it was the second evil spirit. They are the same. He thought to himself that it was not here, that there was like a monkey that was jumping back and forth and was now both behind and in front. It was very scary, but he tried to control himself because there was no other option. He decided to make a false move. He managed to stun one and laughed to himself that they were weaklings. He grabbed the second evil spirit by the hair. He was indignant that this infection dared to scare him and promised that now she would show who was the boss here. The evil spirit squealed loudly, opening its mouth with sharp teeth. And the system received a notification that the young gentleman had received rage points from the evil spirit. This amused Jiang Bei because he thought that she would fight to the end and it would be hard to defeat her, but it turned out that you could even farm rage into her. This made him very happy and he couldn't hold back his smile. He began to quote some verse again and prepared to deal with the evil spirits. Jiang Bei is very happy and decided that now the entrance should go to the signature technique from Teacher Bei, and promised that the evil spirit will be the most stylish spirit in the entire afterlife and cut her hair. She kept on squeaking a little and it looked very pathetic, but she wanted to take revenge on the young master for this. The evil spirits attacked Jiang Bei again, continuing to squeal and showing their fangs. He was not prepared for this. It seemed that the spirit had renewed all its strength for a second. But at that moment help came to him, and someone from the side shouted for the gentleman to take care of himself. Jiang Bei was really very scared at the last moment and looked at his savior with a puzzled look. Yan Lan, who helped him defeat the evil spirits, asked if he was okay. Jiang Bei turned to the princess and wanted to say something, but she discovered that his spirit for farming had disappeared. The girl smiled and explained that she got rid of the evil spirits and now he cannot be afraid. He assured that he did not feel fear, but inside he was very surprised how this girl could just go and kill the evil spirits the first time. Having put the puzzles in a pile, the young gentleman asked the princess if she was also a cultivator. And she, a little embarrassed, lowered her gaze to the floor and, confirming this, noted that there was no other way she could have escaped from the palace. By this time his older brother and father arrived and laughed that now he was not afraid of spirits. Jiang Bei now understood why the two guards did not intervene and assumed that they knew that the evil spirits were in the palace but did not come on purpose. Jiang Bei smiled and asked him not to thank him after all the new generation had to wash away the old. The father was very upset but did not say anything to his son about this. The father just smiled and noted that since he was so self-confident, the next day he would go to training with his older brother. And then the father replied that the route was to the lair of the spirits, which made Jiang Bei's lower jaw noticeably drop. It was a mountain range near the town of Yun where evil spirits lived. The father thought to himself that the seal in the small meadow of evil spirits had weakened recently, so it would not be superfluous to send his sons to reconnaissance. The father said that strange sounds were often heard near the lair of evil spirits, but suddenly she discovered that her youngest son was no longer in front of him. Jiang Bei fell to his knees in front of his father and grabbed his legs, saying that he didn't want to leave, almost crying. She screamed that she wouldn't go and wanted to be an ordinary, unremarkable rich kid, take care of the people and the country, and let her older brother deal with the evil spirits. Well, when he realized that his father was adamant, he asked to at least give him 10,000 silver for the journey, which made his father even more furious, not expecting such impudence. His appearance became very angry, and he said that it was everyone's duty to drive out evil for the sake of the people. The father began to scold him for thinking that his youngest son had only pleasure and money in his head, and promised that he would kill him right there on the spot for being such a wasteful, idle person. Jiang Nan turned to his younger brother and asked him to listen to his father because he was talking about a serious matter, and suggested leaving without waiting until the morning, but Jiang Bei asked him to wait. He bent down and picked up a small piece of cloth from the floor. He tied it on his head and replied that before that he had one personal matter. He decided to finish with the one who arranged all this. Chen Ju kept trying to listen to what was happening in the place he was interested in, but he couldn't understand why everything suddenly became quiet after Jiang Bei's scream. He imagined that this weakling simply died of fear on the spot, and he was very happy with this thought. His spirit was distracted by some rustling sounds which made him very scared because he didn't want to catch anyone's eye. Jiang Bei pretended to be a ghost and suddenly appeared in a very strange pose and demanded Chen Ju's life. Then he screamed at the top of his lungs that he had seen a ghost, as if waking up the entire town. Jiang Bei sniffed and asked if Chen Ju was going to escape by accident. He turned away and asked not to look at him, jumping up in fear. A flame rushed at him, and then he screamed that it was hellish and asked the great ghost to spare him. His self-confidence immediately disappeared somewhere, and he looked very pitiful. Jiang Bei looked at his opponent and replied that he even liked Chen Ju's previous cocky style, and he could not have imagined that he turned out to be a stinking flower that also brought an evil spirit into his chambers. Preparing to slap Chen Ju's head, Jiang Bei laughed loudly and appraised Chen Ju's lacy satin underwear out loud. And at that moment Chen Ju finally realized that he had been talking all this time not to a ghost but to Jiang Bei himself. He was surprised that he did not die at the hands of an evil spirit as he imagined, and immediately began to justify himself by saying that he just wanted to make a little joke. Jiang Bei grinned and replied that in that case he would also joke with him a little, and used a soul strike. Chen Ju called him little brother and begged him to forgive him. Jiang Bei grabbed his head and asked him if he was really a dog or a human, and demanded an answer to this question. Chen Ju was shaking with fear. He thought that if he didn't tell the answer he would definitely be killed. He admitted that he was a fool and began to ask forgiveness from everyone for disgracing the Chen clan. But for this Jiang Bei received even less than 1 unit of rage and decided that it was an absolutely useless thing. The gentleman immediately lost interest, and heading back to his house, he warned him that if he encountered any more tricks, he would burn not only Chen Ju's clothes. Chen Ju immediately rose to his feet and was glad that everything was over because he was not his equal at all. My concern was that now he had not fulfilled the promise he had given to General Yang. He thought that he might have had another chance to simply run away and escape responsibility while keeping his life. Well, he didn't have time to do that because General Yang immediately met him. The general stated that according to the Imperial Guard Army regulations, anyone who broke the oath was obliged to commit harakiri as atonement. Chen Ju began to beg for mercy and denied his guilt. He said he was ready to sacrifice the golden saddle if only they would spare his dog's life. The saddle was a treasure of a previous dynasty, and its value cannot be estimated. The general thought that in the last few days they had been recruiting new soldiers, and he had both money and a good force. The general also turned around and replied that he understood Chen Ju's intention and ordered him to report to the military department tomorrow. Chen Ju also began to talk about the great soul of General Yang, whom he worshipped. He spoke of his loyalty to the general, which was comparable to the endless Yangtze River flowing endlessly. But General Yang quickly cut it off, not wanting to listen to such vile flattery. The next day Mr. Jiang gathered his sons and invited the princess to listen to what was behind the events of the previous night, and was unhappy that it was built by the Qin family. Jiang Nan laughed that his younger brother, using the trace of spiritual energy on the clothes of the evil spirit, recognized who was behind all this and laughingly called it great progress. But my father wasn't at all happy. He stressed that the other families would most likely support the king, and that the princess could no longer remain in the mansion. Jiang Bei immediately said that this was all solvable and the princess could go with them to hunt evil spirits. Jiang Bei imagined how much he would enjoy this short trip and noted that they would have to order 2 more palanquins which their father would pay for. Father was already angry and said that he would pay him on the head, and ordered him to come down from heaven, and reminded him that she was sending him for training and not on a trip. Jiang Nan turned to his brother and explained to him that the uprising of evil spirits threatened the country, and they were going to suppress their lair, and this was very serious and should not be taken lightly. Jiang Bei noted that this city was very far away. If they did not leave, only the father would remain in the house. And if the other families united with the king and attacked again, there would be trouble. Mr. Jiang asked not to worry about this and said that he had ordered Lao Du to escort the princess to the Wuji sect, where no one would disturb her. One of the assistants immediately showed up and said that he had brought the second and third elders of the sect. Jiang Bei was shocked because he was not only a rich heir but also the son of the sect leader. Jiang Nan looked at her younger brother and her father in surprise, who apparently had not told him anything. Jiang Bei once again began to play to the crowd and call names to her father, who could send a couple of people from the sect to fight evil spirits. Her father called him names in response, saying that it was not his youngest son who could decide this. The princess approached the young gentleman and, placing her hand on his, asked him not to worry. She said that their General Tang Shusen from the king's residence was currently guarding the foot of the mountain. If danger suddenly arose, it was worth finding him. Jiang Bei immediately smiled and turned to his father to ask if he had heard that someone had already gone to clean up the dungeon, and that he and his brother would rather stay at home and brighten up his old age. The father said that it was only because he could not cope with the leader of the evil spirits, and a riot broke out in the city. He waved to his eldest son and asked him to quickly take the younger one away because he was about to flare up with rage. Suddenly a little girl ran out and asked if they were really going to Yuyun. The girl asked to save her mother. Jiang Bei remembered seeing her in Chenlai village. Jiang Nan turned to the girl and noted that Uncle Du had said that the village had developed greatly under her guidance, and asked what had happened. The girl cried and said that yesterday her parents went to sell goods in the city and they were robbed by robbers. Her mother was captured, and in exchange they demanded that she give up the most beautiful girl from the village. Jiang Nan emphasized that who would have thought that there were not only evil spirits but also robbers on the loose, to which the younger brother said that he himself suggested that the girl's parents take up trade, but never imagined that everything would turn out like this. He stroked the girl's head and asked her not to be afraid. He promised that the robbers would pay since they dared to touch his friends. At that time, in the village of Yuyun, the bandits were discussing whether they would bring them a girl in return. One of them thought that this would definitely happen because they had kidnapped the mother of these children, and suddenly they noticed that the boy was actually returning. The boy walked with a very menacing look, and behind him walked the princess dressed in different clothes with her hands tied. The robbers' mouths began to water at the sight of the girl. One of them noted that she was large but quite appetizing. All the robbers began to make very obscene jokes about the girl and her clothes and what awaited her. From the side she shouted to them whether these valiant warriors really wanted to have fun with such a girl, and the robbers answered without a doubt that they did. Suddenly another girl appeared in front of one of the robbers, which did not please him at all but on the contrary scared him. The man was outraged by the devilry that was happening and shouted to his men to immediately deal with the guest. And when he turned around, Jiang Nan had already dealt with all the robbers and was calmly standing and waiting. The robber rushed at the iron, saying that the girls were not alone, that they were not similar, that one of them was a woman and one was a man, and that one was helping whom. Jiang Bei, disguised as a woman, called the robber a rude man, and said that he was Li Yun's flower. If he forgot about this, the girl would become very angry. He ran even faster but didn't have time because his body was struck by an electric discharge. Jiang Nan asked his younger brother why he had to try so hard since he could have dealt with these bandits on his own. Jiang Bei stretched again and answered briefly that it was necessary. He thought that there were so many people in the bandit camp that their rage simply could not be unleashed, although the system warned him that greed leads to death and it was worth being careful. Jiang Bei said that he would simply cut out the bandit camp, but the system noted that he was completely unaware of his own strength. If he rushed into battle headlong, it would be the same as suicide. Jiang Bei stated that the system was too daring and could have just sat quietly as it should have, noting that he was her god hope and the object of her reverence. They had a small squabble, but it quickly ended. The one they took prisoner smiled and noted that his camp of the Black Dragon was ahead and called him master. Jiang Bei had to justify himself that he meant it to me, and that he was not talking to the robber at all. His older brother was already thinking about his younger brother's strange wickedness. On their way to the camp, two bandits blocked their path and asked them to stop and explain where they were going. Jiang Bei didn't choose his expression. He answered rather rudely, picking his nose. He deliberately provoked them to aggression in order to get extra points. They quickly got mad and almost stabbed their supposed colleague, who immediately shouted that they had hit the wrong person. The guards demanded that their third leader be released quickly, but Jiang Bei noted that things would not go that way, and that they should first go and report something to the leader. Jiang Bei introduced himself as Bei Ba. If they needed a third chieftain, they should have washed their necks in advance. The robbers immediately rushed to report and did not invite their leader to visit. He immediately became angry at such impudence and called the young gentleman an impudent fellow. The leader of the Black Dragon camp, named Ji Dahu, noted that their camp did not have such a person, but overall he was not interested in it. What bothered him was that someone unknown came to make trouble in their lair. He hissed that this uninvited guest apparently thought that the Black Dragon chieftain was a soft peach that could be squashed every day. Jiang Bei and his companions waited for the bandits to return to them. Suddenly the young gentleman heard someone calling him by the name. He introduced himself to the robbers. When he turned around, he immediately saw the camp leader several times bigger than him, who was already beating him. The young master was immediately thrown back by such a strong blow. The young gentleman was surprised that the chieftain was also at the initial stage of the ground level and decided to check him out. Having gotten involved in this fight, Jiang Bei realized that his opponent was not so simple, not only in appearance. The fist style was clearly not at the first level of the earthly level. Very quickly Jiang Bei received a very strong blow to his face and was sent flying to the side again. His older brother immediately caught him, preventing him from falling to the ground. Ji Dahu clenched his fist, indignant that they dared to come to his camp and that everyone would have to die because of that. Jiang Nan noted that this opponent was much stronger than his younger brother and asked for permission to deal with him himself, but Jiang Bei refused help. He immediately stood up and declared that he wanted to regain his honor himself and that he had not yet used the points that he had managed to collect. The young gentleman stood up and, coming a little closer, spoke with a mocking tone and asked Ji Dahu's status and asked if he had created chaos and let bandits loose everywhere. Ji Dahu lowered his gaze to the floor, confirmed this, and explained that they did not descend into the furnace for evil, but simply because they wanted to survive. He went on to explain that when ordinary people wanted to buy something, they gave money and they paid with human lives. Jiang Bei pounced on the leader of the Black Dragon camp bandits. Ji Dahu was very surprised because the young master's blows became stronger and stronger each time. Soon the leader of the bandits was already screaming in pain and did not resist. And a little while later he was on his knees and begging for mercy from Jiang Bei. The young master did not deviate from your strategy and decided to humiliate the leader to the end and show what he was capable of. Jiang Bei threw Ji Dahu into the wall, breaking a huge hole with his weight. The other bandits watched this scene with horror. Jiang Bei rubbed his fists and laughed that he was a real bandit, but there was so little rage in him that he didn't even have enough to bite. Jiang Bei threw a torch into one of the buildings and noted that this cursed place brought a lot of troubles. He demanded that these creatures return everything they had stolen, and that the rest should be moved to the village of Qianlan and the rest should be burned. The children cried with happiness and thanked Jiang Bei for saving their mother. The boy looked at the young gentleman with admiration and said that he also wanted to learn to be as brave and strong as he was. He smiled back and promised that he would definitely teach him a couple of tricks. Jiang Nan brought one of the Taoists, noting that the bandits could not be trusted and had to look for this person so that the text would be accompanied. One of them noted that there was a strong yin energy in that place and asked if the junior leader wanted to go down with them, also adding that there was clearly some form of enhanced spell present in the black fog in the middle of the mountain. Jiang Bei turned to the head of the bandit and asked what happened to that mountain. Well, he assured that he himself did not know anything because the Black Dragon's camp was originally located in the mountains above. And then suddenly it dawned on the young gentleman that the Imperial Army was in collusion with the bandits. But even such strong people could not cope with these evil spirits. Suddenly a strange sound was heard, and a monster appeared in front of them, which spoke of powerful spiritual power, and again fresh tasty food was delivered directly to him. Everyone immediately started to fuss. Someone was shouting that it was time to get away from that place as quickly as possible. Jiang Bei also wanted to leave, but his older brother ordered him to stay. He reminded them that their father had sent him specifically for this moment and that he should go and train properly. But Jiang Bei was not happy about these events at all. He found himself right in the thick of the evil that had appeared. Unable to hold back, he crashed into one of the monsters, which he managed to stun with such a seemingly light blow. The two-headed monster immediately moved closer to the young master and was already drooling in anticipation of dinner. The young gentleman did not lose his head and immediately got involved in the fight while complaining about how the monster's mouth stank. Having dealt with this huge giant, he turned his attention to the small wrinkled monster who was already trembling with fear and declared that he had appeared there only to sweep. Having figured everything out, Jiang Bei noted that these evil spirits were not that strong. Jiang Nan noted that this was like the scariest place in the entire ghost game and one could not let down one's guard. The voice of one of the ghosts was heard who was indignant that the pathetic little people dared to invade his territory. Jiang Bei asked his brother what was in the house and then he replied that there was the main evil spirit of the ghost mountain. It was a ghostly demon who was a very strong opponent. Jiang Bei was very nervous when he found out who he would have to fight against. But at the same time he thought that if this ghost was the main one he could give a lot of rage in response, and if there was an older brother behind him then he could say anything. Jiang Bei began to pick up something from the floor as if it were a stick, and his older brother asked what he was going to do, and noted that the seal of the ghost mountain was unstable and he should be more careful. Jiang Bei smiled and asked his brother not to worry, explaining that they were simply greeting this chief demon. Jiang Bei turned to the ghost and asked why he hadn't come out to punish them all yet and accused him of being scared. This immediately angered the evil spirit. Jiang Bei decided to introduce himself but thought for a second. Afterwards he said that he was the one who does not change his name neither on the road nor at home and is called Tang Shusen. He is the deputy commander of the county garrison. This was the man who got involved with the bandits. After this, the young gentleman began to harass the evil spirit in every possible way, shaking out all sorts of points of rage from him. He made very ugly jokes at his expense and insulted him in every possible way, trying to survive until the very end. Jiang Bei finally discovered that the rage from this ghost had been collected quite a bit. But the situation he found himself in was very alarming. From this shining portal came an evil spirit in the form of a man. He was followed by a huge army of other evil spirits. The demon promised that he would definitely destroy all the worthless people soon, first killing Tang Shusen, and asked him to step forward. Jiang Nan got ahead of his younger brother and replied that there was no such thing among them and the ghost would have to fight him. He asked his older brother if he could handle it and received an affirmative answer. The young gentleman immediately ran away from the battlefield. The ghost saw this. You thought it was worth killing two guys at once and sent part of your army after Jiang Bei. Jiang Bei saw that part of the army was dragged after him and was happy because his plan had worked. After sneaking away from his older brother, who was fighting the main spirit, Jiang Bei discovered an army of spirit hunters. He immediately began to call General Tang Shusen. Then he heard his name and asked who was addressing him. Jiang Bei immediately began to ask for help and save his life, running away from the crowd of ghosts. Jiang Bei threw himself into the general's arms and began to say how glad he was to see him. The general began to complain that he was seeing this young man for the first time and did not understand what was happening. The army of evil spirits was already approaching. They were whispering the general's name and were ready to tear him apart first. The general was surprised that for some reason these spirits hated him more than the others and decided that he would have to deal with them after he called all his people to battle. He noted that now that the evil spirits were out of control, they had no right to let down their king. The general understood that there were too many of these creatures and the battle would be very difficult. His men also called out that they might not be able to withstand it. Anyone who accepted the fight or ran away could end up dead. The general turned to his brothers and asked them to hold on, noting that he himself would go for help. Jiang Bei was outraged that the general actually turned out to be a real rat and abandoned his people. Jiang Bei, without losing his composure, shouted to the general to go with him. With one movement he ripped the general's pants open. On his underwear was written that evil spirits are retreating. He and the gentleman barely restrained themselves from laughing loudly and joked that the general had a year of misfortune according to the Chinese horoscope. The general was also angry because he didn't allow anyone to touch his pants. Jiang Bei asked the general not to be angry, note that the evil spirits were complete losers, and the general himself said that if they with their green horns and pimples in their eyes caught his eye, he would kill them all. Evil spirits followed the general's footsteps and swore that they were about to finish him off, although he tried to remove any suspicion from himself and assured that he was innocent. Jiang Bei looked at the notification of his system and was glad that this general was accumulating rage points very well. She decided to put the spirit hunters exactly with evil spirits. He went to his older brother to visit him and find out the situation. Jiang Nan was very good and luck was on his side so far. He managed to break through the evil spirit's defense. Even the evil spirit noted that the gentleman was not so bad, but now he will have to show what real power is to make him experience fear that he will remember for the rest of his life. But suddenly a blow flew at him, asking him not to shout without reason, which discouraged Jiang Nan. This immediately turned the attention of the leader of the evil spirits. Jiang Bei was as usual in his usual spirit, and began to insult even such a serious opponent to the maximum, calling him the most offensive words he could think of. The ghost forgot about the existence of his older brother and rushed at the younger one. He screamed that he would tear the boy into 1,000 pieces. Jiang Nan shouted for Jiang Bei to step aside, but he didn't have time, and the ghost quickly caught up with him and knocked him to the ground. But he didn't have time to do anything, and Jiang Nan himself suddenly appeared in his place. Jiang Bei looked at his brother, whose appearance left much to be desired, and immediately began to ask if everything was okay with him. Then he exhaled heavily and replied that he was glad that his younger brother was safe, and immediately bowed to the ground. Jiang Bei held his elder brother in his arms. This gave him a powerful boost and incredible force to attack further. Even the ghost chief noticed that the boy was experiencing some strange wave of spiritual power. Now Jiang Bei wanted the ghost chief to feel his full feelings for her. Jiang Bei turned to the evil spirit king of Ghost Mountain. He rushed at him and asked him to prepare to die. The young master was hard to stop, and he didn't even think about what he was doing. He just wanted to avenge his brother. He took blow after blow without even counting their number. And at that moment he was thousands of times stronger than the leader of the evil spirits. Jiang Nan, having regained some strength and stood up, was shocked by what he saw in the performance of his younger brother, who had never given any hope. Jiang Bei broke through to the second stage of the earth level and defeated the ghost demon. But it took too much of his strength, and now he needed help. Jiang Nan immediately came to him and managed to catch him before he fell to the ground. The young master's pulse was broken and his spiritual strength was running out. He was simply holding on with all his might, and that's why he was exhausted to such a state. The spirit hunters were very lucky because Tay simply disappeared. General Tang knew that only when the ghost demon guarding the mountain was completely destroyed would the junior spirits disappear. He didn't understand how this could happen because the ghost was very strong. Suddenly he noticed the young heir of the Unki sect, Jiang Nan, who was carrying his brother on his shoulder. The general began to admire that the young heir was able to defeat such a strong opponent. But he abruptly said that it was not him. He explained that his younger brother had dealt with the ghostly demon, and if the general wanted to thank someone, he should thank him. By this time Jiang Bei had finally begun to come to his senses a little and asked what his older brother was saying. Even without the strength, Jiang Bei turned to the general and said that if he wanted to thank him, he should bow to the floor. Jiang Nan explained that his brother was delirious after being seriously wounded, and that they should go if there was nothing else to do. The general immediately began to talk about how they were heroes and promised to report this to the king. Soon Jiang Bei gained some strength and could already walk on his own. He entered the lair of the ghost demon, and there he saw Princess Yanlan, who was sitting on the ground and crying. The girl, just looking at the gentleman, immediately threw herself into his arms and began to scream how afraid she was. He asked the girl not to worry, and hugging her tighter assured her that he would be there. Well, it turned out to be just a dream. He suddenly jumped up and screamed loudly on the bed. There was a princess in the room who immediately approached the gentleman and asked what had happened. The girl was glad that the young gentleman had finally woken up. The gentleman's gaze immediately fell on some flour, and he realized that he was the one to blame for everything. She offered him a calming potion and told him that he had slept for 3 whole days and everyone was very worried about him. Jiang Bei was shocked by how long he had slept, but the girl reminded him that he had fought a ghost demon, which was very dangerous. The young gentleman immediately noticed the dark circles under the princess's eyes. I realized that she had most likely been on duty near his bed all the time. He touched her cheek and asked for forgiveness for making her worry. The princess instantly blushed with embarrassment. She immediately ran away, shouting from the street for him to take care of his health and take the medicine on time. Jiang Bei thought that there was something clearly wrong with the girl. The system immediately called him a weakling and emphasized that if the man did not replenish his strength, the girl would definitely run away. Lightning Mister was outraged by such name-calling, but the system noted that he had passed out from fatigue and was the worst master she had ever had. The system noted that this time he was simply lucky to survive the fight with the evil spirits, and next time he might not get off so easily. Jiang Bei mentally agreed with her because when he was a homebody it was much easier. But now, when it was worth going outside, there were monsters and great cultivators everywhere. The system became amused, and calling the young gentleman a youth, noted that it was time to finally get him some real equipment.